Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
Good evening. It really did not have the drama of the debate a week ago between Congressman George Hansen and his Democratic challenger Richard Stallings, but nevertheless the candidates for Idaho's other seat in the U.S. Congress used their television encounter last night to disagree about almost everything. Republican Congressman Larry Craig and his Democratic opponent Bill Heller did disagree about wilderness, arms control policies, Central America, and who would be the best leader for Idaho in the Congress. Tonight we'll do some day-after analysis of the Craig-Heller debate with two journalists and with two officials, one each from the Republican and the Democratic parties. Both Craig and Heller said last night that they want to balance the federal budget. They disagree over how best to do that. Craig wants an amendment to the U.S. Constitution mandating a balanced budget. Heller wants a law tying new spending to revenue increases or to corresponding cuts in programs. Heller says his plan will cut $180 billion from the deficit in 3 years. Craig says it will force tax increases and cuts in the defense budget.
I'm glad to see that we finally agree that the budget ought to be balanced, and of course the question is, how do you get there, Marty? I think the problem we've had is what is the best solution? Do we tax our way to a balanced budget, or do we hold down spending? I prefer, through a constitutional amendment to balance the budget, that we hold down spending while we allow the economy to catch up. In the George Miller pay-as-you-go approach that my opponent has endorsed, it represents in the first year a $75 billion cut in defense, and then it represents, much as Walter Mondale has represented, a substantial tax increase. Not over the 3-year period that has been addressed by my opponent, but within a 1-year period we would have to see, it appears, about $150 to $60 per month increase in the average family of 4. You bet it's pay as you go. It's pay through your nose as you go and out of your pocketbook.
But Heller said it is he and not Craig who really wants to balance the budget. And he accused the congressman of being a big spender on all the wrong things.
You know, I've heard you talk many times. Every time it's spend money for people, then it's deficit spending. It's bad news. We can't do that because we need to balance the budget. But you continue to vote for things like spending $1 trillion in space. Isn't that deficit spending? Your priorities are not for people. Your priorities are for big, fancy military systems. You're as big a spender as there have ever been because you voted for every one of those military programs. Spend, 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 while you try to label politically, and using demagoguery, if you will, label Democrats as being big spenders, and that's incorrect.
The issue of Idaho wilderness came up again and again during last night's debate, Craig charging Heller with flip-flopping, Heller accusing Craig of playing politics with wilderness.
The problem with my friend and opponent here is that he is the classic of the flip-flopper. He said in July in Sandpoint that once he passed around the state, that he visited with folks, that he talked with the Sierra Club and with loggers and all those interest groups, that he'd come up with a number. That's what he said. That's a quote from the paper up there, the Sandpoint Bee. And yet, of course, in the League of Women Voters questionnaire of this year, he said that he couldn't produce an acreage figure, that it was unimportant for him to produce an acreage figure.
I refuse to come down on wilderness because I understand what's going on with this issue. I think Congressman Craig is using the wilderness issue politically. He's playing politics with our land, politics with our jobs, and politics with my business. The result of his tactics have not been to produce a bill for Idaho. The results have been fear, hate against environmentalists, and no bill. Now, the fact that we don't have a bill is what's going to cause jobs in Idaho. Idaho needs to know, timber industry needs to know, what the resource base is going to be so it can get forward with its planning process for capital investments and for marketing strategy. What we've done here is we've driven a wedge between the timber industry, the loggers and the mill operators, for the purpose, a wedge between them and the typical Democratic candidates that they normally support, for the purpose of gaining a few cheap votes.
In another exchange on the same subject a bit later on, it was Craig who had to defend himself on wilderness.
You were quoted on August 16th in the Lewiston Tribune saying that you were not worried whether the conservationists were willing to compromise or not. You said, "I've got the votes to move a bill." Congressman, where's the bill?
Well, I'll tell you where the bill is. The bill is where it ought to be. It is not the 3.5 million acre bill that the environmentalists asked for. In the final weeks of the negotiations in Washington, we crafted a bill that was an excellent compromise. We increased our acreage. We looked at those different areas and those ecosystems. Idaho had a bill only to see a single Eastern congressman fail to work with us because it was in his interests in Akron, Ohio, and not in Lewiston, Idaho, or Post Falls, that we have a bill.
Twice last night, Craig accused Heller of changing his position on disarmament.
Bill, I would like to ask you again to clarify, if you would, the question of unilateral freeze. You said to the Idaho League of Women Voters questionnaire, to the Sandpoint Bee, to the Idaho Citizen, to KAID-TV, in your own words, that you would support a unilateral, one-sided freeze or a unilateral disarmament. Now, I've quoted those sources. That's what you said. Would you explain why you changed your mind?
I may have not expressed myself the way you would have liked it expressed, but I have not changed my mind. I stand on my party's platform on nuclear freeze. You know, the major point is that your policies, the policies of deterrence, are the policies of mutual fear, and that's not the kind of world that I want to live in. I don't think it's the kind of world that the people of Idaho or the people of this nation want to live in. We've got to take some positive steps, and we've got to do it right away to start turning the nuclear arms race in the other direction.
And the charges went on. Craig saying Heller is tied to a program of tax and spend and disarm. Heller accusing Craig of being beholden to out-of-state campaign money, favoring big business over people. Indeed, the candidates could agree on very little, including U.S. support for covert activities in Central America.
We have a communist, Marxist dictatorship in Nicaragua that is totally oppressive and certainly views itself as our enemy, and I think if we are true believers of human rights, we have to view ourselves as their enemy.
It's wrong. We're cheating there. We're financing a CIA covert operation. Now, I wonder if we ought to do that with every country that doesn't agree with us politically. We'd be at constant war. This is foolishness. It's the wrong thing to do.
Let's take a closer look at last night's debate now and this campaign for the 1st District in Idaho with two journalists. First, one who asked some of the questions last night. The other, his perspective comes from the living room television set. Quayne Kenyon is a reporter with the Associated Press here in Boise. He was one of the 3 journalists selected to put questions to the candidates last night. And Bill Hull is the editorial page editor of the Lewiston Morning Tribune newspaper in Lewiston. He joins us tonight in Moscow. Bill Hull, was there a winner or a loser last night in that exchange?
Yes, I think overall Larry Craig was the winner. I thought they both, as a matter of fact, did rather well. I could, there were some exceptions to that. I could go into some picky details, but I thought they both came across as a better selection, perhaps, than the 2nd District voters saw a week or so ago.
Is there realistically, though, any hope that Bill Heller can win that election?
In my opinion, no. In my opinion, Bill Heller doesn't think so either, and he has no intention. He'd be glad to win this time, but he doesn't expect to win this time. Bill Heller is really running for 2 years from now.
Laying the groundwork for '86.
Yes, he is. He's taken this opportunity of replacing the gentleman who died and getting a good early start and learning some of the ropes this year. You'll probably see a different debate in 2 years.
Quayne Kenyon is one of the people who watched it in the studio here. Did you have a sense that someone prevailed?
No, I don't think that that Heller had much of a chance going into the debate because Craig is always so well prepared. He has a great grasp of the issues, and he comes across very well. I think Heller did gain some ground in the long run. He's a person who had almost no money to start with, no money for district-wide media, and as a result, he badly needed the exposure that he got last night. It will help him gain some ground, but it will not help him win the election because he's too far behind. I agree with Bill that Mr. Heller's major gains may come 2 years from now, and I think Craig will be much more beatable in 1986.
Let me ask both of you to take a couple of these issues that we just saw them talk about and that they spent a good deal of time on last night. First being the wilderness issue. Quayne, do you think that it means anything to the voters of the 1st District that there is not a settlement of the wilderness issue via a bill?
I think that the people who would complain the most about the lack of a wilderness bill, the timber companies, recognize that they don't want 3.5 million acres of land locked up. If that was the option that was available to them, then I think they would be happy with no bill this time around. Craig has really managed to defend himself quite well on that ground.
Bill Hall, do you agree?
Yes, I thought that was the central point of the debate last night, and it's primarily why I say that Craig won the debate. Of course, there are 2 ways to judge a debate, and I've been talking about debater points. Perhaps those are less important in this television era than image points. On image, I thought they both came off rather poorly. I thought Larry Craig, although he handled himself glibly, also came across as a bit of a pompous windbag, and Heller, at the other extreme, was much too limp and nervous, and didn't seem to know where the camera was. I hope I'm looking the camera head on now. And but on the wilderness issue, Heller defeated himself on wilderness. He to this day refuses to take a stand on that issue. At one point, I heard him say, I've never taken a position on acreage. That's a strange boast for someone running in Idaho when wilderness is probably the prime congressional legislative issue of this election.
Is he in effect trying to have it both ways, appeal to both sides of this issue?
Well, if he is, I don't think he's fooling anyone. Everyone knows that he tilts toward the environmental position, and so it's just a matter of whether you think he would prefer something approaching the governor's 1.2 million, or he tends to be a moderate, so I'd assume that he's somewhere between 1 and 2 million acres.
From where you sit in northern Idaho, does Larry Craig's charge that the reason that he was not able to manufacture a bill rest in the lap of Ohio congressmen, does that sit well with folks in the north?
Well, I can't speak for folks in the north, but that's demagogic, of course. You know, Ohio is in the Midwest, not in the East, and Larry loves to say Eastern, put a nasty Eastern label on everything. If it's a position he disagrees with, it's an Eastern position, and if it's a position he agrees with, it's one of those wonderful Idaho positions. But there are up here a lot more environmentalists, I suppose, per capita, just as there are a lot more timber industry people per capita, because that sort of thing happens when you have trees instead of those funny little bushes you people have down there.
Quayne Kenyon, another one of the issues last night they talked about a lot was a balanced budget with different approaches to arrive at the same thing. Did either score any points on that issue?
I don't think so. Bill Heller had a perfectly logical proposition, the pay-as-you-go plan. Larry Craig had a lot of points that could be made for his argument. I didn't give either candidate, in my mind, much of a advantage on that subject.
Comment on that, Bill Hall? Is that a big issue, do you think, with people?
No, I don't think it's a big issue. I think most people know exactly what's going on there. They're both blowing smoke. Neither one of those gentlemen, nor any of us here, is going to see a balanced, a constantly balanced budget in our lifetime. That's not going to come to pass. That's a couple politicians posturing a week from the election.
Let me ask you both finally, and then we'll move on to our partisan political pros here. Bill Heller has tried to say in the last few days, Bill, that Larry Craig is an ultra-right-winger. Even if he is that a big sin in the 1st District of Idaho?
No, we like kooks in this state, as we've proven repeatedly. I don't think kook quite applies to Larry, but he does vote with them. He has a moderate appearance, he has a moderate way of speaking, but on the record, on the voting record, he is usually with that 20 or 30, those 20 or 30 members of the 435 in the House who will vote against practically anything. He's not there quite so often as George Hansen or Steve Sims, but let's say he's in that 40 or 50, and Sims and Hansen are in that 20 or 30.
Well, politically, that doesn't seem to be much of a liability.
No, it doesn't. This is one of the most conservative states in the Union, and As a native, I can say this is one of the most redneck states in the Union, too. And it's not so much a matter of conservatism per se. It's more a matter of country parochialism, that we're kind of one big white male-dominated society here in Idaho, and we're a little suspicious of labor bosses and liberal college professors and people with black faces and pushy women. That sort of thing scares the hell out of people in this state. I'm sorry, I said hell in a broadcast in Idaho. That proves the point.
Quayne, how about the reverse side of that? Craig's saying that Heller is a liberal and he's trying to hide it from people.
Well, there is no doubt that, that Heller is more liberal than most people in Idaho. He, of course, makes no bones about being in favor of ERA, for example. He supports the Democratic Party on platform on nuclear freeze, which is a pretty strong position. I don't think that, that Bill Heller is quite as liberal as Larry would paint him out to be, but he certainly is far more liberal and far more moderate than Craig is.
Mark?
Yes, sir.
You know, the significant thing about what Quayne is saying, I think, is that you can get a lot more trouble being a little more liberal than most Idahoans in this state than you can be being a little more conservative. I think on the issues, point by point, you'd find Larry Craig is probably a little bit more conservative than the average person in Idaho, and Heller is a little bit more liberal. But people will excuse somebody for being excessively conservative in this state.
Okay, we'll come back to you both. Thank you. Let's get a more partisan view of this whole thing now. First with Janet Miller, National Committeewoman for the Republican Party. She joins us tonight in Boise. And with Mel Morgan, the State Democratic Party Chairman, who joins us tonight in Pocatello. Mr. Morgan, what did you think of Bill Heller's performance last night?
Well, I'm a Bill Heller fan, so I don't think that's exactly fair. If I had a handful of Bill Hellers, I would run this state. He's as fine a candidate as I've seen in many a day.
Why do you say that?
He's got charisma, he's bright, he's a successful self-made businessman. The word liberal really makes me laugh. If you look around this state and hire a very good detective agency, you'd have one heck of a time finding a liberal Democrat in Idaho, or a liberal of any kind. There may be a few lurking out there in the woods, but I sure haven't bumped into them.
So that's a specious charge against Bill Heller.
Very much so.
Janet Miller, pick up on that point and tell me how you thought Larry Craig did last night.
I thought Larry Craig did very well. Larry always does well. Larry does his homework. Those that work for him know that they have to do their homework because Larry will follow through and expect them to have their work done. Larry is especially fiscally conservative, and I think that Idahoans are fiscally conservative.
What about the liberal conservative discussion you've heard already here? Pick up on that theme. Is there something to be gained by being a little bit more conservative, to borrow Bill Hall's terminology, a little bit more conservative than the average person in Idaho?
I think that most people are conservative. And as has been noted, Larry's voting record is very conservative. He is a politician who's willing to listen to people. He really does work with his constituency. Larry takes many polls and tries to go with what the vote of the people that he's representing indicate by the polls that they're taking. I do think that maybe it certainly cannot hurt in Idaho to be a conservative.
Mel Morgan, realistically, does Bill Heller have a chance to win this race?
I think the late start has hurt him badly. Getting back to that liberal and conservative label, when Larry Craig was in the legislature, he was noted as a moderate Republican. He reminds me of the Bannock County Republicans that when they run for office, they suddenly become very liberal. And it just doesn't wear well. Larry is not as conservative as he portrays on the national scene. What he does is attempt to vote right, so he's going to get reelected again. I'm not convinced he believes all that.
Well, is there anything fundamentally wrong with that? A lot of politicians vote the way they need to get reelected, don't they?
No, but he's gone clear over, if you look at his voting record. And I just don't think you have to do that. We had a perfect example of that.
So you're saying, in a way, he's not very honest about what he believes?
No, I don't think he is very honest about what he believes.
Ms. Miller?
Oh, I totally disagree with that. Larry votes just the way he votes the way in Washington that he talks in Idaho. He also has held true to his constituency from the time he served in the Idaho Senate. I think that when you look at his voting record, you'll see that what he says or did say in 1980, he is still voting the same way. He hasn't flip-flopped on issues such as Mr. Heller has done. Larry is out there, he has the same position. He's willing to listen to people, but his main thrust has always been the same.
Come back one more time on that, Mel Morgan.
Yeah, I think Bill Heller's greatest advantage is that he's been able to press Larry Craig's panic button. And he's done it from the very day he got into the race. If I had been Larry Craig, I would never have answered Bill Heller. But he has seen fit to answer him. And Bill didn't have the money to run a strong campaign. So the very first thing you do is start jumping on the other candidate. And it's worked very well for him.
Again, let me just ask you one more question about the political nature of things in the 1st District. Has Heller really given the voters, Mel Morgan, any real reason to turn Larry Craig out of office, though? I mean, the incumbent always has an advantage, and you need to peck away at that somehow. Has he done that?
If Bill Heller had started when everybody else started, I'm sure this would have been a different kind of race. I think he's got problems, and I'm not sure he's going to get elected. That may be blasphemous for a Democratic state chairman to say, but all I can tell you about Bill Heller is he'll live to fight another day.
You're not worried about Larry Craig's re-election chances, I take it?
Not worried about Larry's election this time or in '86. You know, maybe Mr. Heller hasn't had the funds to put into this race, but he himself said early on that he felt that if people heard what the candidate said and liked that funds would follow. He's been working at this since last summer, and he really hasn't had the funds come forward. I think Larry has, because people know how he'll vote when he gets to Washington. They know that he votes right, and he certainly can take care of his constituency in Idaho.
Well, on that note, let me open it up and invite any of you to get back in whenever the spirit strikes you. And let me go back to something that Quayne Kenyon said earlier. You said that you thought Larry Craig would be more vulnerable 2 years from now. Why?
Well, there's a variety of reasons. I have to agree with Mel Morgan, by the way, because the candidates that I know who run for Congress start the November or December before the election year. That puts Bill Heller 7 or 8 months behind in fundraising, organizing, and everything else. He never really had a chance to win this election. The fact, if he even comes close, he'll be a very good candidate in 1986. 1986 also will be the so-called off-year election, the year the administration has had 2 years. I'm expecting Ronald Reagan to win. 2 years from now, I expect him to be far less popular than he is now. That'll make most Democratic candidates better off 2 years from now than they are now. I know of at least 2 other candidates who want very badly to run against Larry Craig 2 years from now. I think all of that points to the fact that he will be much more beatable in '86 than he is now.
Janet Miller, do you agree with that?
Well,
I take it you don't, because you said you thought he'd be a good candidate next time around, too.
Right. I agree that he will win again in '86, but exactly what Quayne said is true. Normally, the off-year election is one that is better for the party that's not in office. If you recall the '82 election, the Republicans lost some seats. We didn't lose as many as traditionally the party that is in power would be expected to lose. So it'll be a harder race in that respect. But again, I think that Idahoans have voted for the person that they think is doing the job. So although Quayne's statements may be right for a general race, I think that Larry again will be returned because he does take care of his constituency.
Mel Morgan?
Well, that sounds a little bit like arguing about the balanced budget, which isn't going to come to pass, or the wilderness bill, which is certainly not a factor in this election because there is no wilderness bill. I just say that next time around in '86, the Democrats are really going to be loaded for bear, and we'll see how Larry Craig holds up under a real strong attack.
Bill Hall in Moscow, what does it say about the state of the Democratic Party in Idaho that we're talking so much about an election 2 years away when the most immediate election is a week and a half away?
Well, it says 2 things. It says the Democratic Party is weak, as it has been for 10 or 15 years. And to compound that, this is a year on which Ronald Reagan is on the ballot, and Reagan is immensely popular in Idaho, and those coattails are going to have some effect, although probably less at the congressional level than on lower races.
Okay.
I did want to, Mark,
Yes,
if I may
please.
pitch in and agree with Quain, that whether Heller will be able to win or not in 2 years, he will almost unquestionably, if he is the nominee, run better in 2 years. There is a myth in politics that if you run once and lose, you get some sort of a loser image, and that hurts you the next time out. The reverse is generally true. Candidates do better the second time around, often get elected, for the obvious reason they're more experienced, and they begin with, say, 30% name familiarity instead of zilch. We're seeing this in the Stallings-Hansen race this year.
Well, on that point, I'm going to switch to that race for just the last 2.5 minutes here and catch you all by surprise. Quain, as we sit here 10 days before the election, how do you read Hansen and Stallings?
Every indicator that I've heard in the last few days, polls and everything else, indicates that Stallings is so far ahead now that Hansen will not catch up.
Okay. Janet Miller?
Well,
Counterpoint of view?
I've seen some of those same polls. I always say don't count George Hansen out. He's pulled off some tremendous surprises in the past. Right now the big issue is that there's a very large undecided vote out there, or at least on polling the people are saying they're undecided. I think George can still pull it out. Again, he's represented his constituency. So I think George has a chance of winning.
Okay. Mel Morgan and Pocatello, how do you read the Hansen and Stallings race tonight?
Well, I'm a member of George Hansen's constituency, and I don't think he's represented me in quite a while. I have to believe from the polls that I've seen and from living in the district that George Hansen is too far to catch up. It's not going to be Democrats that beat George Hansen. It's going to be Republicans.
How about this undecided vote, though, that Janet Miller talks about? Do you agree that there are a lot of folks who haven't made up their minds yet?
No, I don't think there's that many undecided in the polls I've seen.
Mark?
Yes, sir.
Anytime a political leader starts talking about the undecided vote, the translation of that is my polls show our guy is behind and we're hoping like hell that this undecided vote will come through.
So how do you, you're not in the second district.
I read that as Janet Miller's prediction that George Hansen, as of now, is going to lose, but I did just return from the second district and I hear pretty much the same thing Quain heard.
Okay, and would you, I guess you would agree with Mel Morgan, it'll be disaffected Republicans who will do the number on George Hansen if it's done.
By definition, it has to be. There isn't a majority down there of Democratic voters, if it's going to happen, it's going to be Republicans saying we got to get rid of this guy and try again next time.
Is there any one thing, Janet Miller, that could turn this race around, that race around in 10 days?
Well, I don't know that there's any one thing, but George is doing all the right things now in the campaigning he's doing, people that he has speaking up for him. I've been hearing some good ads, and I think he's running ads in the newspaper. You have to realize whether the polls that are being used, whether the people that are asked are those who are actually going to vote, or if it's just the average man on the street who maybe isn't registered and hasn't voted. We know that Congressman Hansen's supporters will get out and vote for him.
We got to go. Janet Miller and Quain Kenyon, thanks for joining us tonight. Bill Hall in Moscow, thank you. And Mel Morgan in Pocatello, we appreciate your being with us tonight. We'll be back on Monday. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.